My life isn't the most thrilling, but it's stable. I'm 40, single, no kids. Some might think that's a sad situation, but honestly, it's fine by me. I have a steady job, a comfortable house, and I only have myself to worry about. I'm a bartender at a high-end luxury rooftop bar in a nearby town. The place caters to the type of crowd that sees ordinary bars as beneath them. My own home, however, is nothing fancy. I live in a pretty average neighborhood about a 20-minute drive from work. Still, the job has its benefits. The tips are incredible, and the constant flow of new faces keeps things interesting. Because the bar is upscale, we don't really have the same regulars you'd find in a more casual spot. I like that. I've never been comfortable with customers getting overly familiar with me. Maybe that's just my nature. I've always been a bit of a private person. Oh right, my name's Kevin. That'll matter later. It was a Friday night, our busiest evening of the week. The bar was packed as usual, full of friends toasting, couples on dates, and a few people who seemed to wander in just for the prestige of it. One of my favorite things to do while working is guessing what kind of person someone is based on their drink order. Complicated cocktails? They're probably trying to impress someone. Whiskey neat. That's had a rough day order. I noticed a couple at the end of the bar finishing their wine. It's always better to offer a refill before they have to flag you down. I was in the middle of mixing drinks when someone caught my eye. A man walked in who immediately seemed out of place. He was tense, with a scowl plastered across his face. His jet-black hair was a mess, and he wore a dirty black hoodie beneath a worn leather jacket that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. Stains covered the jacket. But what stood out most was the sheer anger in his expression. He looked furious. He walked straight to the bar, but instead of sitting, he just stood there, staring at me. I couldn't help but wonder how he got past the doorman. Clearing my throat, I asked him if he'd like a drink, keeping my tone neutral despite the odd vibe he was giving off. He didn't reply right away. He just kept glaring at me like he was gearing up for a fight. Finally, he muttered that he wanted a double shot of Jaeger. I grabbed a glass and poured it. Jaeger isn't exactly a popular choice at our bar, where people tend to go for pricier options, but I wasn't about to judge. I placed the glass in front of him and moved on to help other customers. When I returned to settle his tab, he tossed crumpled bills onto the counter. That was unusual. Almost everyone here pays with a card. I rang him up, ready to move on, but then he spoke again. His words still haunt me. I knew I'd find you here, Kevin. I froze. My eyes locked on his as I tried to process what he'd just said. I put the glass in my hand down and asked him, quietly but firmly, how he knew my name. I didn't want to draw attention, but I wanted him to understand I wasn't messing around. He didn't answer. He just stared at me with the same intense anger. After a few moments, he finally said, "I know what you did." Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and walked toward the elevators. I wanted to yell or run after him, but I stopped myself. I was at work. I couldn't just abandon my post. So, I stood there, completely thrown off. I didn't recognize him at all. I couldn't think of anything I'd done that would make someone act like that. I'm no saint, but I don't make enemies either. The whole incident left me in a bad mood for the rest of my shift. When I finally clocked out, I drove home, but I couldn't shake what had happened. I kept replaying his words in my head, searching for any logical explanation. By the time I went to bed, I was still rattled. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I'm not sure why. I didn't need the bathroom, and I usually sleep straight through until morning. But something felt wrong. I lay still, keeping my eyes open, waiting for them to adjust to the darkness. That's when I saw it, a dark figure standing in the corner of my room near the door. My heart started pounding. I was certain it wasn't supposed to be there. Someone was in my house. I stayed perfectly still, pretending to be asleep, while my mind raced. I counted to 3 in my head and then jumped out of bed, screaming as loud as I could. I was ready to fight, but the figure didn't come at me. Instead, they bolted for the door. As they moved, something fell to the floor with a loud clatter. I chased them through the house, but by the time I reached the front door, it was wide open, and they were gone. I thought about running outside to look for them but stopped myself. What if it was a trap? Instead, I locked the door and went back to my room. Turning on the light, I saw what had fallen, a knife from my kitchen. My stomach dropped. Whoever that was, they'd planned to hurt me, maybe worse. I called the police immediately. They arrived quickly, searched my house and yard, but found nothing. I described the man from the bar and told them what had happened. They got security footage from my workplace, but as far as I know, they haven't caught him. The scariest part? I'm sure I locked all my doors that night. I always do. But the police couldn't figure out how he'd gotten in. There were no broken windows, no forced locks. To this day, I have no idea how he entered my home. I haven't seen him since, but I'd be lying if I said I don't think about that night often. I work as a bartender at a suburban bar and grill just outside Baltimore. To help you understand the story better, let me describe the setup. It's a bustling spot with a quirky system. No servers, just bartenders like me and cooks in the back. Customers have to place orders for food and non-alcoholic drinks directly at the bar, and then collect their meals from the counter. Why this setup? Maybe management wanted to save money by not hiring waitstaff. Regardless, it keeps things moving quickly, which I actually enjoy. The place is surprisingly popular, even though I personally don't see what the big deal is. The vibe is lively most nights, with upbeat music, a buzzing crowd, and a standing area near the DJ booth where people gather to dance and socialize. The constant flow of customers and high-energy atmosphere make the shifts go by in a flash. I thrive in fast-paced environments, so this job suits me perfectly. Honestly, I'd probably lose my mind working somewhere slow and quiet, but I know some people prefer that. That night began like any other. It was a weekend, so I knew we'd be slammed. Sure enough, the bar quickly filled up. The crowd skewed younger, mostly college-age kids, which meant more dancing, spilled drinks, and a generally rowdy atmosphere. Unfortunately, it also meant smaller tips, which was a bummer. One particular group of college kids kept ordering round after round of tequila shots, so fast that I could barely keep up with the salt and lime. It's always chaotic when their crowd takes over. One guy in the group was so drunk he tried the same cheesy pickup line on me 3 separate times. In the middle of the chaos, I noticed an older couple walk in and settle into a booth in the corner of the restaurant. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about them. If anything, I just found it interesting that 2 people their age would choose such a loud, chaotic spot. But I didn't have much time to dwell on it. I got back to work, pouring drinks and keeping up with orders. Fast forward about half an hour, maybe a bit longer. I was mid-pour on a line of gin and tonics when my eyes drifted back to the couple. My hands kept working on autopilot, but my brain zeroed in on them. That's when I realized something odd. They were just sitting there, completely still. They hadn't ordered anything, no food, no drinks. I would have remembered if they had. On closer inspection, I noticed they weren't even looking at each other. Both of them were staring blankly at the wall beside them, and they didn't appear to be talking. It was strange enough to stick in my mind, but the bar was packed, and I had too much to do to investigate further. I figured maybe they were waiting for someone, or perhaps they didn't realize they needed to come to the bar to order. When things finally slowed down a bit, I decided to check on them. I approached their table with a friendly smile, but neither of them acknowledged me. The woman didn't even flinch, she kept staring at the wall as if I wasn't there. The man, however, turned his head ever so slowly, almost unnervingly so. When I got a good look at his face, a chill ran down my spine. His skin was pale and drawn, and his eyes looked deeply sunken. He didn't say a word, just gave me a single, deliberate shake of his head. Something about the way he stared at me made my stomach turn. I muttered some generic response and quickly returned to the bar. The encounter left me unsettled. They seemed so out of place, not just in the bar but in the modern era. I avoided looking at their booth for a long time after that. Eventually, things quieted down, and I remembered the couple again. I glanced over at their booth, and nearly dropped the glass I was holding. Both of them were now staring directly at me. The woman's gaze locked with mine, unblinking, unwavering. I quickly looked away, pretending to be busy, but I could feel their eyes on me. When I finally mustered the courage to glance back, the booth was empty. They were gone. As mean as it sounds, I was relieved they'd left. By the end of the night, I was still replaying the incident in my head. While closing up with Karen, a coworker who's been there for years and has an eagle eye for details, I decided to ask if she'd noticed the couple. Karen gave me a puzzled look and said she had no idea what I was talking about. I stared at her, certain she was joking, but she insisted she hadn't seen anyone like the pair I described. Then, she rattled off a list of at least 10 other customers she'd served that night, complete with details about their orders and outfit. I forced a laugh, playing it off, but inside I was panicking. How could she have missed them? I knew what I saw. When we locked up for the night, I walked to my car, still trying to make sense of it all. That's when I noticed 2 dark figures standing beneath a streetlight across the road. It was them. My breath caught, and I nearly dropped my keys. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and sped out of the parking lot without a second glance. The drive home was a blur. My mind raced with questions. Had Karen somehow missed them? Were they even real? Was I losing my mind? I don't have answers to any of those questions, and I doubt I ever will. I never saw them again, and I never found any explanation for what happened that night. Breakups are tough, even when you know they're the right decision. I've been doing my best to hold it together after parting ways with my boyfriend of 2.5 years. I don't want to go into too much detail. It wasn't dramatic or messy. We just realized we weren't the right fit anymore. Knowing that didn't make it any easier, though. Some days, it felt like everything around me reminded me of him. I've been sticking to no contact, convincing myself it's the healthiest way for both of us to move forward. But it's been so hard, really hard. One thing I missed the most was playing pool together. It was our thing. I'm a pretty good player, probably above average, but my ex? He was amazing. On his best days, he could land trick shots effortlessly. 1-rail, 2-rail banks, kicks, combos. I'm pretty sure he was even getting the hang of standard mass shots. We both had pool tables at home, but staying in every night wasn't really ideal. Whenever we went out, we made sure to pick bars with pool tables. Crowded bars with endless waits and loud, rowdy crowds weren't for us. Instead, we favored quieter places, typically dive bars with worn-out tables and sticky floors. Sure, the tables weren't in perfect condition, but they were way better than anything we'd find at a bustling college bar. We were usually the youngest people there, but we didn't mind. By that point in our relationship, we'd outgrown the typical college, let's get wasted every night mindset. Besides, my ex was outgoing and could chat up anyone, and being decent at pool gave us a good icebreaker. A few weeks ago, I found myself missing that part of my life more than usual. It was a random Wednesday night, so none of my friends were free. I didn't want to just sit at home and wallow, so I decided to head out to one of the bars we used to visit. I told myself it wasn't about nostalgia, that I just needed a change of scenery. To be honest, I'm not the type to go out alone, nor do I usually have the confidence to, but something about that night pushed me out the door. The bar was exactly how I remembered it. Dim lighting, worn stools, a jukebox tucked in the corner. The familiarity was bittersweet, almost enough to make me turn around and leave. But I forced myself to stay. After ordering a couple of drinks, I wandered over to one of the pool tables and started absent-mindedly chalking a cue. I didn't really have a plan. Playing alone felt a little odd, but before I could overthink it, a guy walked over. He looked to be in his mid-20s, one of the only people in the room near my age. He leaned on the table and asked if I was up for a game. I nodded and told him to rack 'em up. As he set up the balls, I noticed he racked them wrong but didn't say anything. We played a few rounds and I started to relax. He wasn't bad, not as good as my ex, but not terrible. I wasn't cutting him any slack though, and I won every game. We chatted between shots, and he even bought me a couple of drinks. He was nice enough, but it quickly became clear he wasn't exactly the sharpest tool in the shed. I tend to go for quick-witted, clever guys, and he didn't quite fit the bill. Still, I didn't mind. It felt good to play, chat, and not overanalyze everything for once. After the fourth game, he asked if I wanted to go back to his place. The question caught me off guard, but I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. I froze for a second, then shook my head, trying to make it lighthearted by saying he'd need a second date for that. Honestly, I just wasn't ready to move that fast. It wasn't that I'd completely ruled out the idea of seeing him again. A random Wednesday night just didn't feel like the right time. Apparently, I didn't handle the rejection well enough because his whole demeanor shifted. His smile vanished and he started scowling at me. Before I could react, he said, "Are you serious?" and grabbed my wrist, muttering something about the drinks he'd bought. Then, to my shock, he snatched my purse. I'd never experienced anything like that, so I froze, too stunned to scream or fight back. Even though we were in a public place, I was terrified. Thankfully, a couple of older guys at the bar noticed what was happening and stepped in. One of them told the guy to let me go. He glared at me, muttered something under his breath, and threw my purse back onto the table before storming out. My heart was racing. I thanked the men profusely and called an Uber to take me home. Still shaken, I climbed into the car and decided to close my eyes for a moment. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, the driver was gently waking me. We were parked across the street from my house. I thanked him, got out, and started walking toward the door. As I rummaged through my purse for my keys, I impulsively checked my phone for the first time since leaving the bar. That's when I saw it. The notification that said, "AirTag found moving with you." My stomach dropped, and my hands started shaking as I frantically searched through my bag. Tossing aside my wallet and makeup, I finally found it, a tiny AirTag hidden in my purse. A wave of panic hit me, far worse than what I'd felt earlier. I was standing in the middle of the street, so I threw the AirTag on the ground and stomped on it repeatedly until I was sure it was broken. Fighting back a scream, I started breathing heavily, trying to calm down. I needed to get inside, but the street was eerily quiet. Whoever had planted the AirTag, most likely the guy from the bar, knew my general location. Maybe not my exact house, but definitely the street. I grabbed my purse and ran to the back door, fumbling with the lock before finally getting inside. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my heart pounding like it was about to explode. I was safe, but I couldn't stop shaking. I went upstairs to my room, still trying to process what had just happened. Normally, I'm asleep by 10 and out for the night, but there was no way I was getting any rest. I stared out my bedroom window, hoping the scenery might calm me. As I gazed outside, I noticed an old, beat-up Lincoln driving slowly past my house. It wasn't too unusual, but it was pretty late for cars to be on our quiet street. When the car came back from the opposite direction, moving even slower, dread began to creep in. By the third pass, I couldn't ignore it anymore. It had to be him. He was looking for my house. My heart raced as the car passed again, this time with the driver's window rolled halfway down. I wanted to call the police but hesitated, scared that he'd figure out he was in the right area. I know it sounds irrational, but fear clouded my judgment. The next time the car came by, the driver's hand was hanging out the window, holding something. It looked like a knife. This time, the car stopped directly across the street from my house. I ducked down, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. After what felt like an eternity, I peeked out, and the car was gone. I stayed frozen for another hour, too scared to move. The next morning, I told my parents everything. My dad scolded me for not calling the police right away, but I explained that I'd been too scared to think straight. He called a friend of his, a police chief, to ask for advice. His friend said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence or the car's license plate number, which I hadn't seen. He advised us to call the police immediately if we ever saw the car again. I didn't leave the house for days. Even now, I'm scared he's waiting somewhere, watching, ready to follow me again. I haven't seen the car since, but the fear still lingers. Maybe the nightmare is finally over, but I'm not sure I'll ever feel completely safe again. I used to work as a bartender at a small bar on the outskirts of the city. It was a cozy place with quirky decor and a lot of character. I really enjoyed my time there. One quiet night, I was the only person working, and the bar was nearly empty. As the evening dragged on, I found myself alone. That's when a man walked in wearing a strange mask. It wasn't a Halloween mask or anything seasonal. It looked like a full head mask of either a celebrity I didn't recognize or just some random person. The sight was unnerving, especially since it wasn't anywhere near Halloween. The guy silently took a seat at the bar. I walked over and asked what he'd like to drink, but he didn't respond. I tried joking about the mask, asking what it was for, but he just sat there silently. After an awkward pause, he suddenly got up and walked out without saying a word. I felt relieved when he left, though the encounter left me uneasy. A little while later, a group of 5 or 6 friends came in. They ordered drinks and were lively and friendly, chatting with me as I served them. At some point, I glanced up and realized the masked man had returned. He must have snuck in while I was busy making drinks because I didn't notice him arrive. He sat at the far end of the bar this time, silent as before. The group of friends noticed him but didn't say anything. After sitting there for a short while, he got up and left again. The group eventually finished their drinks and headed out, leaving the bar empty once more. By then, it was closing time, so I locked the doors and started tidying up. As I turned off the lights and did some final cleaning, I noticed the masked man again. This time, he wasn't inside. He was standing outside, staring at me through the window. I tried to ignore him and moved out of sight. When I checked back, he was gone. Leaving that night was nerve-wracking, but thankfully, I made it home without incident. I never saw the masked man again, but the memory still gives me chills. If these stories kept you hooked, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with your friends who enjoy a good fright. Make sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you'll be the first to catch our next chilling upload. Got your own horror story? Share it in the comments. We might feature it in a future video. Stay safe and always remember, it's not the darkness you should fear, but what lurks within it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.